So you think it's only wrong because it's misleading and yeah, we are not being that trustworthy, but does it impact like the trustworthiness? Does it impact how this how it's impact the result? For example, a statistical point of view.
The study wasn't set up to take into account any like controls or anything to do with that particular thing that you're now looking at.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's pretty good. Anybody else? Yeah.
How you set up your controls is depending on your hypothesis. If you do the HARKing, you got the results and you want to set up the controls.
Yeah.
I'm speaking on behalf of the online audience.
Yeah.
So Mike said that it's nonsensical to HARK with p-values, as you could never falsify a post-dicted hypothesis.
Yeah. So great. I mean, we are in the open science summer school. I didn't expect less. So I want to talk about the philosophy behind pre-registration. And before I go to the philosophy, I think it's important to first know why we have to discuss about the philosophy behind pre-registration. I don't know if you know about the history of pre-registration or not, but then there was a time that meta scientists very much incentivized and tried to push other scientists to do pre-registration. And it went kind of fiasco because like people were pre-registration like doing a horrible job in pre-registration without taking into consideration why they are doing it, and it was a horrible job, and then just to get a badge or something, and then meta scientists were like, oh, okay, no, you should not do this, you should do this. But the harm was already done. There were a lot of papers that got this badge of they are doing pre-registration, and that was accounted as like, oh look, I'm very open researcher, but yeah, that was not really well earned. So it's important to talk about this philosophy also because a lot of criticism that is about that pre-registration gets is because of this misunderstandings toward the philosophy of pre-registration. But as was mentioned, pre-registration has a very, very deep connection to falsification. This guy is Karl Popper, the person who talked about falsification a lot, and he mentioned that the validity of a theory is on how it can be also falsified by either observation or experiment. So if you want to have a falsificationist philosophy towards science, the role of your hypothesis testing is how it can critically evaluate the success of the model. So if you remove that critical evaluation, then you're not within the boundaries of falsification anymore. And this is what happened with HARKing. Like you can no longer evaluate the predictive value because you're not predicting anything anymore, but you are stating what you have seen and pose it as a prediction. So you don't have that ability anymore. And this comes to a very important concept that you will hear me talk about it a lot in this 1 hour, which is about severe test. So severe test is a methodological approach toward controlling the bias impacting the result. And what does it say? When your test is when you are severely testing a hypothesis, that you have a low probability of making false prediction and high probability of making correct prediction. So if you have a correct prediction, you want your test to also support that prediction. And if you have a wrong prediction, you want your test to not support that prediction. And whenever you're engaging in these kind of selective reporting practices, QRPs or HARKing and this stuff, you're chipping away this severity. You are messing with this probability of your test. So this is what's generally wrong with all these QRPs. And what can impact the severity of tests? It can be theoretical decisions, like making an unfalsifiable prediction, or methodological decisions if you have bad measurements or invalid measurements, or statistical decisions like removing data, adding data, whatever that people do. These can all severely like impact the severity of the test. And as Sam mentioned, they are pretty much common as well. And even when we say common, I mean these are all based on self-reported percentages that they have done since like 2012 till 2023. That people are engaging in these predictions a lot, even though this is probably an underestimation. So you can see data picking, excluding data, HARKing, optional stopping, rounding p-values, and all of that. Like they're pretty common. But when you have a frequentist way of error control, you want to keep your error rate within the boundaries that you pre-specify. So both your type 1 and type 2 error rate, you want to be within the bounds of the pre-specified boundaries, because the role of frequentist tests is to control in the long run. And in order for independent researchers to check whether your study is within this boundary, they need to have access to all the predictions. So they would be able to check whether you these acceptable boundaries are you are within this acceptable boundary or not. So back in 1966, there was a scientist called Packer, and he was also worried about this. And he was also thinking that, okay, seems very weird that we change or we make something like some of these decisions that can impact the results after we see the data. Wouldn't it be nice to have a registry that everybody would put their decision before they look at the data and they say, oh, we want to do this? And he also went through that like some other scientists said that wouldn't it be nice that we send a letter to ourselves that the timestamp can tell that when we pick this data, whether we wanted to run one-tailed or two-tailed tests from the beginning. So the idea of the preregistration were around from 1966, and that's exactly like now if we're going to go to the official definition of preregistration, it's pretty much the same. It's a complete timestamp description of all information related to the planned analysis, including experimental design, measurements, data pre-processing, and when a statistical test is corroborated or falsified. That is demonstrably created without access to the data. So these are all the things that I mentioned from the philosophy and all the also the ideas that why we should not have access. Are you familiar with sharpshooter fallacy? It's that there is this idea that when someone shoots an arrow and it hits a bull eye, if you don't see that the entire situation, you would say, I don't know whether you draw it after you shot the arrow or it was there beforehand. So this is why that we need to do it without access to the data, because then we cannot be sure whether the bullseye was drawn after the arrow was shot. So, based on what I said, I have another question for you. So, based on all this philosophy and all these things that I said about pre-registration, when do you think it doesn't make sense to do pre-registration?
When you're totally clueless what the outcome is.
Yeah.
If you're planning on conducting an exploratory data analysis.
Yeah. More ideas?
After the data's been collected.
Yes. Okay. As you said, exploratory research, secondary analysis, when you have access to the data, and also qualitative research. So why it doesn't make sense to do pre-registration in this format that we are discussing today is that first you want to make a error control claim, and you cannot do that when you have exploratory research. You have access to the data, so you cannot exclude the probability of having bias, like having your decisions impacted by bias in secondary data analysis when you have access to the data. And again, in qualitative research, you are not again making a statistically controlled claim, error control claim. So it doesn't make to do pre-registration. But does it mean it's not valuable to know what these people are doing? Do you think it means that, okay, then if you like publish whatever you want as an exploratory analysis? Is it good that we don't have access to these data of like what, when, how they make decisions? Do you think it's fine for them to just publish without? I see some shaking head.
Does pre-registration sometimes help to find if somebody else is doing the same type of research and that you might collaborate or?
Yes, I mean, in theory, yes, but a lot of times people don't make their registration available, publicly available beforehand, sometimes in fear of scooping. But then, yeah, but in theory, when you register and it's available, it also prevents duplication. So if you're planning the same thing, you can also contact those people and say, yeah, I was also planning to do the same thing. Let's work together. But in practice, it doesn't happen that much because people don't share their registration that often at the beginning.
There's a question online. Sorry, Sajedeh.
Yeah.
What about meta-analyses and scoping reviews? Are they considered qual?
Meta-analysis, no. Like qualitative research, I think it gets. I think what's considered qualitative research is that when you are doing a completely descriptive, not statistically driven error controls, and for meta-analysis, I say that pre-registration can help a lot because you can make a lot of these decisions beforehand, but you have to also make. I would mention a little bit further that like there are certain points, certain information that you have to make available in order to people make sure that you didn't have access to the data beforehand to make sure that it doesn't impact your decisions. So as you were all shaking your heads, it is indeed very important and very valuable to have this idea of how people make decisions in this type of analyses, like exploratory analysis, having access to the data, or qualitative analysis, qualitative research. And there are a lot of tools that they can be used for Open Lab Notebook. And Open Lab notebooks are like kind of like a logbook. If you're familiar with it, is that you're making a change and it will be all the change has been kept as a log, and an independent person can look at it and see when some changes have been made and this can help when you're finally done your analysis and done your research, then an independent person can look at how you made the decisions and when you make these decisions. And GitHub, GitLab, Jupyter, Zenodo, there are multiple others. I put just the very famous one. I myself use GitHub for my qualitative research, and I think it was quite helpful also for me to keep track of what I've done and what I have changed throughout the process. But yeah, if you have any questions about it, if you are planning to start something, let me know if I can help with setting up this for you. But okay, this is also a little bit loaded question. Do you think it's okay then to deviate from pre-registration, given the role of pre-registration in making sure that you're severely testing your result, your hypotheses?
If something like that
Yeah, exactly. It's weird to expect that there would be no way that people that there would be a way that people can predict everything at the beginning and then to run their studies, because there are a lot of things that can happen that are beyond the control of the researcher, and they can impact the severity or they cannot impact the severity. But these are some of the common reasons that you may need to deviate from your pre-registration. For example, unforeseen events. Very good example of it is COVID. Imagine you had a lab study and you collected some data and then COVID hit, lockdowns. What you should do? Should you like break the rules and bring people into the lab secretly to get to your pre-specified sample size? Or do you have to like make data for the rest of the people that couldn't come to the lab? It's of course like very weird solutions to that situation. But yeah, indeed, like you can publish with all the data that you have, because you couldn't possibly predict that something like that can happen. Or I don't know. I mean, COVID is I don't know. It's a very weird example, but what if there was a fire in your lab and you cannot find the same tool or cell, same instrument that you want in other labs that you can have access to? Then you cannot reach your pre-specified sample size. So all of them would, of course, decrease your power and would reduce the severity of your test. But there are also other unforeseen events, like, for example, if you are doing a survey, an online survey, and it suddenly goes viral, and instead of having 200 respondents, you have like 1,000 respondents. Should you remove all of them? It's again weird. So in that case, it would actually increase your severity, because it will increase your statistical power. So and another example is mistakes in pre-registration. It is very common that you make a mistake in pre-registration. You think that you would do something, but then after you collect data, even without looking at the data, you realize, oh yes, I think that was not a good idea, or missing information. So you make some information registered, and then you realize that you didn't specify, for example, your smallest effect size of interest, if in case of having needing to do equivalence tests. Sometimes you have violated assumptions. For example, when you bring your participants to the lab, you give everybody an introduction or like an explanation of how the experiment should work. You assume that they all understand, and you assume that they all would act as normal or like respond truthfully. But this cannot be the case in a lot of real life examples. And also, for example, you may want to, for the last one, falsification of auxiliary hypotheses, for example, you want to replicate a study that's like very simple. They use t-tests, and you collect the data and you realize, oh, my data is not normally distributed, so I cannot use t-test anymore. So all of them, they can, there are possibility, as I said, that it would increase the severity of tests, it could decrease the severity of tests, but also it can have no impact on the severity. So it's important that when you are doing, when you are making these deviations, to think about what was wrong, so specify what was wrong, and then think about how it can impact the severity of the test that you planned. And then sometimes it can also impact the validity of your test. So you also have to think about those situations as well. And then actually, if you look at that paper, Lackens 2024, there is some examples of how you should report this, and how you can report the mistake, how it can impact the severity, and how it can impact the validity. There are some examples there. But there's also, for example, if you pre-register at OSF, OSF has this possibility to update your pre-registration whenever you're making a change. Of course, it will keep the log of all the changes, and that's related to this idea of multi-stage pre-registration, which goes into that mistakes can happen. There are always unforeseen events or a lot of assumptions that goes into the experiments that we are doing. So it would kind of make it all transparent and available for other people to realize and make their own judgment about what you have done in your research. So now I have a little bit of a small activity. I want you, like where you are seated, maybe the people that are close to you, think about the criticisms of pre-registration. Think about you yourself, like critically think about pre-registration. What is wrong with it? What are the downsides of pre-registration? And you can also think about, if you read about some criticisms, even if you feel it's not valid, think about those like those criticisms for like maybe, yeah, like 8-9 minutes, and or less, depending on how I see the room is. And then we can discuss, and I will also walk you through some of the common criticisms that are there, and we can discuss whether they are valid or not. Yeah. Sarah, tell me, you were discussing very passionately. I want to know about it.
One of my things, like if it's publicly pre-registered, it means that I was thinking along the lines of like drug studies, because I study pharmacy. It could potentially draw the eye of pharmaceutical companies, who might then contact the researcher to give certain financial incentives to influence the study.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing, like I think a lot of the criticisms we've had were specifically about public pre-registration, and someone could pre-register a paper with a title that has quite a bold claim, and the idea could spread without the data backing it, and that could influence people's opinions.
Yeah. Mindlessly taking pre-registration as a
Yeah, like we
Within-
talk like you know,
Right.
people,
Yeah.
completely non-scientific people on Facebook. Someone could grab a screenshot of it, and be like, "Look, there's a scientist studying this, so it's real." Like
Yeah.
that could then just kind of spread, and then obviously you get people poaching the ideas as well. But pre-registering without it being public, my only initial thought was kind of a person having a kind of internal pressure to meet their own expectations, but I think that's more down to the person, and I think that the decisions of a person are gonna happen anyway. And if a person's more like, it's like whether a person wants to be correct or find what is correct, I think that's down to the person.
A few online, if you, I'm happy to, I'll feed them to you so you don't need to.
Yeah.
Because there's like several that have sort of touched on a similar issue, and that is about, I guess, flexibility and the generation of new ideas and studies. So some comments are, new research will occur during the course of a study, and it might make sense to adapt the study to consider new findings. It limits flexibility of the research to explore more findings in the study. It might inadvertently act as a ceiling or limiting flexibility with study design change, even if it might be for the better. So those kinds of things have been like a prison rather than.
There's also the sort of pre-registration before, but it's the administrative side of it, especially if you are sort of like limited in time or limited in funding and that kind of thing. Sort of what steps need to be taken to do that, and then sort of like if it's your crunch for time or crunch for sort of funding and stuff, how much of your time is going to be dedicated to pre-registering and adhering to your pre-registration over actually either doing the study, doing any of the other sort of planning and other things you have to do around the research as well. And the other one, sort of say on the public side, is even with sort of the unforeseen things that we talked about before, how many, if it's public and you have to sort of change your pre-registration 2, 3, 4 times, it could almost inadvertently call into question either like the veracity of like the study before it's been published, or even maybe the research themselves. Even if you've got a really good study with a really good, like I said, data set and conclusion at the end, if you've got 3, 4, 5 alterations to your pre-registration, that could sort of call into question, even with your data and your analysis, whether that was you've had to do changes this behind the scenes, even if it was for unforeseen circumstances or something that wasn't related at all. Someone will probably just see, oh, there were 5 or 3 or 4 alterations to a pre-registration, and that could sort of unconsciously call into question the veracity or the strength of the results.
Any other ideas?
Maybe you can get frustrated about people's comments. They judge you, and there may be some like comments that frustrates your study. Psychology, yeah, frustrations.
Okay, there were very interesting ideas. I'm gonna go through this, and then also I will come back to all of the things that you mentioned as well. So typically, whatever like the criticisms over pre-registration, they can be categorized into 3 groups. One of them, they said that pre-registration doesn't worth doing. Other ones are like the negative side effects of pre-registration. And the third one is some misunderstanding toward pre-registration. So the criticism fall in there because there are some misunderstanding about why we do pre-registration or what is pre-registration. So, for example, in the registration is not worth doing, is some people say is unnecessary paperwork, and there are 2 different ideas in there. There are some people that say that we have this theoretical rationale. We can tell if when we are reading a paper, but we can tell if there are HARKing, if there are some bias practices going in there. And on the opposite side, they say that we don't have at all good theory, so it doesn't make sense to do confirmatory study, and all we should do is exploratory study. Well, these two are kind of like talking directly about the two opposite ends of the spectrum. And do you think we have either like very strong theories that we can tell the HARKing and p-hacking and stuff, or two vague theories that it doesn't make sense to test at all in your fields? We pretty much fall somewhere in between. I don't remember what Paul Mill called those theories, but yes, we are in between. We have like kind of theories that are not that strong, but also not too vague to not that we don't have any possibility of creating any tests on it. So, and because we are in this situation, then it is indeed makes sense to run tests, because you cannot tell by the strength of your theory that if there are some bias selection there, or yeah. Another one is that methodological falsification is not the best way. This was something that some people mentioned in the chat, and that yeah, there are other methods like Bayesian approach that they don't have these problems of like maybe having an error controlled claim. And that being said, there are some yeah, I mean, you have to understand, I first specified the philosophy behind pre-registration to identify like in what context pre-registration makes sense. But there are some Bayesian approaches that they also have this concept of severity. To be honest, I'm not that familiar with them, but I can give you some references if you are interested to read those about this severity aspect of Bayesian statistics. And yeah, and there is also this important fact that it's there is no way that we can say that this that we can throw out this way of thinking, this philosophy of falsificationism in science. And indeed, if you are following a different philosophy and it doesn't make sense to do pre-registration, it's another approach, but you cannot say that pre-registration, like falsificationism, is just we should throw it out in the bin. So there is not much support on that this is a bad philosophy to follow on. Another criticism is that they say that this approach it will marginalize other philosophies towards science and will threaten pluralism in science. Especially there are people in constructive constructionism that they follow this approach, and mainly their criticism is toward that yeah, it's if you do pre-registration, it kind of devalue what we are doing. But it's also not that strong claim, because you cannot say a best practice of a different philosophy is bad because it doesn't give that much attention to my philosophy of science. So it's kind of weird to make such a claim. The second group, I will quickly go through them, and then I will mess things a little bit with time. Unintended side effects that registration dissuade from exploring data. We talked about it. Some of you mentioned it, that people feel bad about exploring the data if they do register. As I said, first of all, this is an empirical question. If you say pre-registration dissuade people from exploration, there are some few studies that looked into that, and overall they couldn't find any effect on pre-registration making researchers to do less exploration. That being said, is that we also mentioned that this is a specific approach toward a specific form of research. So if you're doing exploratory study, first you don't need to do registration in the first place. So it also doesn't make you don't need to feel that you're being dissuaded from it. And researcher commitment bias that you mentioned, that people feel that they are stuck in the planning that they have done, and also some people from the chat mentioned that they cannot make changes. As we said, deviations from pre-registration is pretty common, and it should happen, especially when you realize there's something wrong and there's something that would impact the severity of your test. And it is completely possible to deviate from pre-registration. And there are there are guidelines about like how to do it, how to report it, to make it as transparent as possible. And the last one in this category is that the registration is a sign of good quality, which we saw that happened before as well, that people were looking for the badge and thinking, oh, if I pre-register, this means that I have a good study, I'm a very good open researcher. Again, as someone else mentioned, pre-registration is actually putting you in the situation that people can see if you make a mistake. People can see if you are changing something. So if anything, you are getting more criticism. So there is this connection maybe that if you're doing a very high severity test, then they can be correlated with more truth, but it doesn't mean that it's a better study. There are also good studies that have not been registered. So it doesn't mean registration in itself, with the definitions and with the background knowledge that we talk about, is not a sign of study quality. And lastly, is misunderstandings, that is reduced exploration. We discussed already again. Makes claims about truth of the theory. Registration makes works with claims, not with theory. And if if you're having a good claim, if it does relate or not to a theory, a good theory is another question that is not within the boundaries of registration. Improve the theory, again, it's registration only focuses on the claim, not the theory that claim is related to. And also, some people say that it is covering up malpractices, like you can test multiple times your data. If you're doing multiple testing in a correct way, so in if you're correcting for like errors that you can make, it is indeed okay to do multiple look at the data, for example, sequential analysis. But if you're doing it in an opportunistic way, pre-registration allows other people to see that you have not had this idea beforehand. So it creates this flag of you should take care more about it. I would stop now. I don't go through the last part of how to pre-register, because Emma will cover that part pretty much. And then in the end, we will have some time for all the general questions. So if you have questions, please write them down, not to forget about them. And thank you so much.
Yeah. I should have put a bet on when you were going to mention poor meal. Right. So